Yeah, I can send like an email out too with a bunch of information in it as well after the fact, with a lot of these things. So first, I'll just talk a little bit about like what makes a good case study. So what I've done is I've pulled up a couple of different a couple of different portfolios. I have to enable my computer to screen share really quick. So what I'm going to show you is three different portfolios that are all built using the three different tools I'm talking about that all have been job ready people that are at Amazon right now. So I think one of the things I was just talking about a second ago is one of the misconceptions a lot of the time is like you want to spend a lot of time on visual design, branding, and things like that to stand out from the crowd. When if you think about it a little bit more from the UX perspective, one of the common design principles is around familiarity, and that's a key design principle for like UX. So it's not a big deal if you choose a template that's very like repetitive or very similar to other people's, as long as it's easy to use. So like one of the things that people are actually measuring when they come to your portfolio site is how, like, kind of the UX of your site itself, like how easy can I actually navigate it, how can I get to the things I want to see as quickly as possible. So for me, as someone that's been in a hiring manager role before, what I'm actually going to do when I come to a portfolio site, so this is Landon was actually in my first prototyping class, and he got a role as a UX designer at Amazon after the fact. He was already at Amazon but transitioned into UX design, and this was the portfolio he used to land his internal transition. And so as a hiring manager, what I'm going to look at, I only really have time to look at your portfolio site for about 2 to 5 minutes. So like there's really a, if you think about it from a user perspective, like me as your hiring manager or someone reviewing this is the user, there's a couple of key principles that you got to keep in mind for like formatting your case study. Number one, I need to be able to navigate it easily, right? So I can clearly understand kind of what his projects are. I'm going to always click on the first one first and then probably this one next, maybe one or two things only. You also want to optimize for scannability. So like if I was actually reviewing this website, I'm going to come in, and this is also built on UX Folio, by the way. That's why I'm showing you this. So if I come in and I click on his Brooks running case study, that'll be the first thing I'm going to do. Then I'm going to scan it. And so when I'm actually talking about like what makes a good case study, there's a similar to the principle I was saying a second ago about familiarity. There's a very common format that we're looking for. And if you're missing pieces of the format, it kind of makes a red flag. And so I think like Jonathan's heard me say this before and people in the other class, what you're trying to do with your portfolio presentation is reduce the amount of questions that we have. So like you're just going to try to put some things out there that actually map to the format that we're looking for, and then also inject your design process and who you are as a designer into your writing. So I think a lot of the branding comes from how you solve problems, like you as an individual solving problems. What is your process and how do you explain it? That's what we're more looking for from a UX perspective than anything like visuals or things like that. So when I come through, what I'm going to look at is I'm going to scan really quickly for like, what is the project? What are we doing here? I'm probably not even going to read this a lot of the time. I'm just going to quickly look at it like, okay, cool. I see this is a shoe running an accessory thing. Then we're always going to look for the problem. So like normally people either say, what's the problem statement or what's the challenge, right? So you see on a lot of portfolios, challenge or problem statement. This is super key and critical. And so normally what we're looking for as hiring managers, we're looking here to see what was the original business problem. So like what was given to you, what was provided. And I think this is kind of difficult for people when you first start because there's really two problems. There's one that was provided and there's something that you kind of reframed. It's like a lot of the time what happens like on my most recent project, they say, hey, we have this problem where we want to build a chatbot to help us with routing people to the right healthcare provider. Then what I realized is the chatbot is completely wrong. There's a solution within that problem, right? So like we learned that, oh, really, there's 60% of people are getting to the wrong form of care and they want more personalized healthcare. So that was the real problem. You actually state the business problem here. And then later on you say, hey, I did some initial research and I reframed it to this. That's how you want to do it. So there's actually two separate ways to do it. So first you state the problem. So I'm going to look here. It says, hey, cool, here's the three problems. So bullet points are super important a lot of the time. Like I can quickly scan these. So you're optimizing for scannability. I can see what the site was before. You don't have to do this, but I'm really more interested in what the problem set was. So then you see how he has the challenge, right? So like the problem is separate He put it a little bit differently in his, but this works fine. He's kind of scoping it down here. So this is more like the scope of the project. And then role is always super important. So I want to know exactly what you did and what the difference between you and the other people on the project did. So as you're going, you can call this out or you can call it out here. And then process, like process is the next thing. So after you've kind of shown us the overview, the challenge, and the role, we want to know your process. And it should have some research included, some design process as well. So you see he's in this one, in this class, we focused on write testing. So it was rapid iterative design and testing. So he's showing like, hey, I started my research with affinity diagramming, user interviews. So these are more generative pieces of information that are, I would expect the problem reframe after this here. So it's like, okay, now that I have a little bit of information and I'm scanning kind of like what he's talking about here, I'm really more looking for the results of these than the questions. So that's something I would come out with, like what are the top 3 findings from each area of this. So I would want to see like, hey, from affinity diagramming, I learned these things. So whenever I was teaching this class, the portfolio class, we would say anytime you state something, a deliverable or a process piece, you should put the why in there. Because if you just say, hey, I did affinity diagramming, me as a manager, I'm going to say, why'd you do that? And if you don't tell me why, I'm just going to have more questions than answers here. So I would actually change this to say, I did this for these reasons, and here's the findings, right? And then I would do that on every case. So he did that well here. He's like, here's the 3 findings I learned from the user interviews, and then card sorting. And I think the one thing that's, you can go either way on this, but whenever you're building your portfolio, some people go in a deliverable focused way, kind of what you're seeing here. Like it's a deliverable. Every single header is a deliverable. And then they tell us why they did a deliverable, or you can write it more in prose and say, hey, this is kind of what the design process was. And as we were going, we came up with these things. And I'll show you a detail of that in a second. But either way works fine. Normally more junior designers, which I think is easier to start, have a portfolio that's structured more like this, where it's like, I did this deliverable for this reason. And I would say that's actually in your advantage because you're showing us that you have a grasp of what the deliverables are and you have a grasp of why you're doing them. So this is an advantageous type of presentation for someone that's earlier in their career. So I'll kind of skim through these, but he has a lot in here, and then he shows his ideation process, which is really awesome. I think the one thing that I was harping on a lot in the portfolio class is we care more about your thought process than where you landed. So I actually, as a hiring manager, I'm going to look more at the different revs you went through, and I want to see more sketches, more wireframes, and you iterating there. I care way more about this and your thought process in this moment than the outcome, which is something that people don't always understand. But like, we're not really looking for the final polished UI. We're trying to understand, okay, you were doing these things to increase engagement, increase conversions. Because a lot of the time what happens in UX is you'll launch something and it won't work the way you thought, or pieces will work and pieces won't, and you need to have fallbacks. And so if we can sit here and see that you iterated through a lot of different ideas, we can know that you even had considered other ideas that you can fall back to if something doesn't work out, right? Or it also demonstrates the process that you can continue this if something doesn't work out. Say, hey, I know how to focus on this thing and continue going. Lastly, he goes into user testing, things like that. So this is a pretty straightforward process. So I'll tell you kind of what, from a very high level, what we're looking for. It's the overview and the role, the challenge, the initial research, your design process, the sketches and iterations, then the validation, which is what your user testing is. And then lastly, we're going to look for outcomes and metrics. So we were going to look for, okay, now that you did all this work, what changed? And did it change for the better? So he's still showing iterations here. We'll get to the bottom. He shows another iteration, and then he shows some desktop designs, which are great. Then we get to the end, and then there's probably going to be some conclusions. Yeah, so here's the conclusion. Here's the results. We delivered all these things. Here's some qualitative impressions. And then next steps is always great to see too. Like, if you could do this differently, what was missing? Do you have the self-awareness to tell us like how you could reflect it and change this? This shows not only humility, but it shows your ability to like continue forward. A lot of the time, that's kind of the difference a lot of the time between client work and people that do client work and people that are more like involved in day-to-day like enterprise work. You have to take this project and keep going and continue it forever. And in client work, you kind of stop and you just hand it off. So like being able to know like, hey, these are things I would have done differently and continued forward, that's always good to show. But this is pretty much the in UXfolio. And so what I'm going to show in a second, I actually really like UXfolio because it sets up things in a very similar way to kind of what you would desire from building a portfolio. But I'll show you a couple other examples too before we jump into these. This one was built in. Any questions or thoughts before I jump into this? I'd said a lot already.
There's a question here from Edwin, who asks about detailed annotations. And Paul, I know you want to have a question as well. So Edwin, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's important to include like a lot of different iterations, a lot of different sketches. Does it help also to include high detailed information there too? Like you're probably just gonna scan through it, but is it also good to show?
Yeah, I think it's like, especially so if you think about it almost like where you are in your career, right? You almost want to show that you have the ability to do all these things. And so like I would just drop a couple of examples, like, hey, here's some detailed annotations I did. And then you can explain why again, like, hey, I did this to make it easier and clearer to the developers or explain the interactions. Other things that I've done, I've seen other people do is like drop an actual full presentation in there. So it shows one annotation, they can pan through it as much as they want. But I think it's a positive because there's a lot of different types of designers. And like when you show a skill set like that, you're showing a little bit more like information architect and interaction design skills, which are missing in a lot of teams. So I would totally like show at least an example of it. And you can say, I have that in one of the ones I'll show you a second ago. It says, this is an example. If you want full access, request it. And it also opens a link to the recruiter, you know. Cool. All right, and it looks like Paul had his question answered. All right, cool. I'll keep the chat up over here so I'll be able to see it. So this one is actually my friend Terrace. He's a senior designer at Amazon. This was completely built in Adobe Portfolio. So like the reason I'm showing you these is just showing you that you don't have to have the most crazy visual structure or design to your website to land like a pretty solid job here. I think his bigger portfolio pieces are the ones down here. But it's going to be the same process. If you look at this, like Terrace presents himself much more as a like pure UX designer than Landon does. Landon has a little bit more UI skills and he's a little bit more on the interaction design and UI side, where Terrace is like an information architect first with a very huge UX background. He doesn't, like before he came to Amazon, he never touched visuals at all. So I used to work with Terrace in the past and I would sometimes do the visual updates, but he would always do nothing but pure wireframes and hand them off. So like there's different flavors to UX. This is why I'm saying like you can position it differently and it's still fine. So like he's very much black and white. It's about the information, but it's a similar construct. So he has an overview, like what is this project about? Goes straight into the business objective, which is kind of like the problem or the challenge that we were talking about before. He has very clear scannable goals. It's like, okay, they wanted to do these 3 things, cater to marketers, they want to improve the usability, and they want to retain compatibility. Goes into immediate understanding the user needs. So talking about like initial research and building out personas. And then he says kind of how he did it. Like, oh, we did heuristic evaluations. We met with the sales and support teams and we benchmarked and prototyped. So here's something that may not be clear up front, but something like this, sales and support team interviews, this actually resonates a lot with hiring managers. So like it's something really small, but if you're sprinkling things throughout your portfolio and your case studies around how you worked with other people, that's something that separates you from a lot of others. So like where UX is a job that's actually more about soft skills than hard skills. So like if you're able to show, what we're really looking for is how did you come to these conclusions? What was your thought process and who did you influence to get this built? That's like 70% of the job. The other 30% is like these deliverables. So I think like if you can demonstrate your thought process and influence throughout your case study, and I'll show you in mine like kind of how I demonstrate that as well, that is actually more important than some of the deliverables. And that's actually, as you're going like throughout your career, it starts shifting to where like your junior portfolio might look a lot more about deliverables. And then like your senior level portfolio is like 70% influence. And you're like, if you're going for a director role, it's all influence. There's like no deliverables, you know, it's like, it gets more and more towards like, how did you influence and get something built as you go? So kind of here, he just goes through very high level wireframes, Analyze the details. So yeah, to this example, like I actually worked together with him on these, so it's perfectly fine to show like, hey, I worked on these, and then he calls out like, hey, I worked at the top. He says who he worked with, but like I actually applied a lot of the visual stylings here, and he did a lot of these like detailed wireframes. So like if you work with a team, it's perfectly fine to like show the shared asset and then just say, hey, I worked on these pieces of it. That's something to call it as well. Yep, there's a prototype this links off to, but we don't really have to look at that. And he talks about finalize the details, and like this UI was made by our teammate Daniel, and he calls it out as well, where he's like high fidelity comps made by Daniel, right? So that's all you really have to do, and you can just show the iteration here. Terrace is very like compact, and it's a couple high level explanations, and then we just jump straight into the design, and it works out fine. And then like the whole team is down here around like who are the UX architects, who's the UI designer, all that kind of stuff, right? So this is a very compressed version of this. And like if you look at an online portfolio, it doesn't actually have to show that much. You can, as long as you're showing like 2 or 3 sentences in each of those pieces. Like Terrace is only really answering a couple of these questions. He's saying, hey, this was the business objective, here was the original scope. Then I went straight into research. Here's how I did, here's my process. And then, this is the back end of the process where I designed this out. And so it's very compact and gets straight there. And this was all built in Adobe Portfolio. Then lastly, I'll show you one of mine that's a little bit more compact as well. And this is Simply Studio. So this is a WordPress plugin that kind of makes the entirety of WordPress very visual. Again, I'll just go over the kind of the structure, but it's very similar to all the other ones. It's just a very brief overview, get straight into the challenge. And you see like everyone does it slightly differently, but they're all equally scannable. I do this block style to where like I try to separate everything by color. And as soon as you hit the next color, you're on the next thing. You don't have to do that. It's just like, you see, I have a little bit more visual influence on these things, but you don't have to. Like all 3 of these people that I just showed you are all designers at Amazon, right? So requirements gathering, just a lot of sketches because that was most of it, focusing on ideation. So it's just going into process. I think you asked the question about annotations. So I kind of have an annotation here that says example annotation, and then like, it's just one. So like if you want all the rest of them, you can get to them, but that's all I really showed. So it's just like, hey, this is how I would hand this off to your developers if you cared about it, right? So you don't have to show too much. You can just pick a couple of places and show it through. And I'm a big interaction designer, so I always focus on having like videos and animations in my portfolio. You can add this with pretty much any of these tools. This one's not playing well right now because it's all choppy over the internet, but like I always do that. So essentially, when I taught the last portfolio class, there's like 8 core pieces of UX, and you really want to focus and even if you're a generalist, you're really going to have like 2 of those skill sets that are your best. So like I'm primarily a prototyper, researcher type person. So like I want to show those strengths more, and I do a lot of interaction design. So for me, it's important to show this and important to show an annotation because I work a lot with developers, where if you're like an information architect, more like Terrace, it's more important for him to show detailed wireframes and heuristic evaluation. Where if you're almost more on the UI side, like Landon, it makes more sense to show a lot of these high fidelity, like visual pieces. So like there's a part of this that comes down to like asset selection and how you want to sell yourself, and kind of think of what your 2 pillars are. Like, am I really focused on interaction design? What am I the best at, and what do I like doing the most? And that's how you want to position yourself. But you see, all 3 of us have a different way of presenting, and we have like different strengths, but it all comes across in a very similar format. So it's the high level there. Any questions on these? So these were just like showing examples. So this one was Simpleast, this one was Adobe Portfolio, and this one was UXfolio. And I'm actually going to go through each of the tools and show you how they work.
Cool. I have a stylistic question for you.
Yeah.
That depending on your answer, I will have to apologize to everyone
That's fine.
here. I've been advising students to consider, rather than using a label style headline of my role, business challenge, bam, 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 which I totally get is great for scanning. But if you can actually put some words to it, like I just saw go by there, like an actual headline, if you could just scan the headlines and learn the story, that puts you further ahead than requiring people just to dive in and read the text. So
like this.
would you support that idea?
Yeah, I think it works either way, honestly. So like, I think I've heard feedback both ways. And so what I normally do is I put the like my role as, this is my newer one. So like if I matters, like I put that in a small subtext like this, like here's the challenge. And then I put the descriptor underneath it as the headline, just so it hits the scannability and it gets the storytelling at the same time. So that's my newer process. So I would agree with what you're saying though.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So then I'm not going to apologize.
No, it's fine. I try to do that as much as possible because like I think it's a little bit more important as you get closer into like what you're saying, Larry, like telling a story with the design. And it really depends on how you position your portfolio. So like this one's much more like a storytelling process around like what was the process, and it says that exact things like trouble in paradise. You know, it's like I'm going through and saying like, hey, here's what's happening at each of these stages, even though we're also hitting like certain goals. Cool. Any other questions so far? I'm going to jump into, so I kind of have a couple of different ways we could go about doing this. So I have, so the portfolio piece I showed you, it's loading again over here, but the portfolio piece I showed you that I made with the kind of really quick kind of scanner app, I have those assets, and I was going to just run through and show you how to actually build that in each of these places. But I'll start with UXfolio, and I'll kind of give you the pros and cons of this tool and why I think it's helpful and how you could use it, right? So I actually build my entire portfolio on Simplice here, but I start everything in a very particular process. So I'm going to show you my process of building case studies and effectively getting these out. Let me see. Can you still hear me? I'm not sure if Zoom is being weird.
Yeah, we can still hear you. Can you spell Simplice?
Okay, cool. You're all frozen on my screen.
Oh, can you spell Simplice?
Oh, yeah.
I've never heard of that one.
I just typed it in the chat. Let's see. My Wi-Fi is being weird. Yep, that's it right there. Cool. All right. So I'm going to show you kind of what my process is for building portfolios and case studies out. So as much as like we're looking at UXfolio, Simplice, and Adobe Portfolio, I start everything in a written format. And so the reason I do this is it's important to explain your process and explain out like what you're trying to do. So Jonathan already kind of went through this before, but what we advise everyone to do is like, don't even put any assets in at all. Come into a Word document and write out exactly what your process was, top to bottom, like all the way through. Like if you were going to explain to me right now how this project worked, write it all the way through, almost like a verbally. The reason this is important, right, is there's a lot of focus on online portfolios, but the thing that lands you the job is the presentation. And so what you're really doing with your online portfolio is making a simplified presentation. And if you can explain all this to me verbally or in written text, then it'll translate to a portfolio easily. And so what you do, and this is actually my same portfolio piece, it's already been edited, but I have everything in Notion. And I'll actually send these around to people like friends or colleagues and have them make comments on like, hey, you didn't do the challenge well here. I don't really understand your role, right? And this is a really good tool to just have people come in, leave comments, and you can address them. So I actually write everything out here. And you could honestly, I've seen people that just have a Notion document and send this as their portfolio. And it's perfectly fine. Like, again, what I was saying, like we're less concerned with your website and more concerned with how you think as UX designers. So like if you sent me this is fine. I've seen people with their portfolios on Medium. I've seen people with them here. So we're actually way more concerned with the writing and how you approach it. But this is essentially where I would start. And then what I end up doing is now you have a place for your content. So I'll put a slight caveat to this, because what I was doing before Notion was I actually used UXfolio for this exact process. It's like I knew I was going to go into Simplice at the end. And what I would do was I would come in here, and I'll show you why. I would come in here and create a case study. And so you can add a new case study. And when you first start building it, it gives you like a ton of these methods right here, right? So you can say, hey, what were the things I did on this project? And for this particular project, it was very basic. I did sketches, I did wireframes, and I did UI design, right? So I'm just gonna hit generate case study, and it's gonna make a bunch of course, it's gonna ask me to pay because I already have a bunch of case studies in here. Well, so it's $9 a month normally. So you also don't have to like spin up a website and do all this stuff if you don't want to. I'll just start from the one I have before. But when you spin it up, it has like presets for each of those things with information already in it. So that's the wrong project. That's a different project. Where is it?
I have a question while you're looking that up. How do you archive or keep track of your process and like as far as like your thought process when going into a design so that later on you can remember why you made that decision? Because sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I'm making this decision. Then you're like, why did I make that decision again?
Yes.
And you don't remember the different iterations or whatever, like maybe they got lost or whatever. I'm just curious how you keep track of all your important thought processes so you can pull that later.
That is a really good question. And that's something that I would honestly say I didn't do until I started working at Amazon. So you remember I was talking a little bit about influence, and like you have to explain to other people like why you made decisions, right? At Amazon, a lot of the time we do that with written documents. So what I adopted at Amazon was I actually write
like a wiki.
So I write all these wikis out. And so what I was explained in the last class that I was teaching was, instead of doing that, or either do that, right, and use that as a tool at your job, and then you can also use it for your portfolio, or as you're going, update your portfolio when you make these decisions. So like if you just ran a research study, right? So I just ran a research study last week, and I'm in the midst of writing a report. That report is a milestone, right? It's a deliverable that we're going to say, hey, we're going to make decisions off of this. So I know the decisions that are going to be like in my portfolio now. Take it and just fill out the user research section. Be like, hey, this is, and then you don't have like this like mass pile of things that you have to do at the end, and you're like, well, now I need 3 months to make my portfolio. It's like, hey, if you're doing it as you go, it's like maybe 30 minutes of just jotting down like, hey, here's the things that we care about, right?
Yeah, that's something that's actually really helpful, because that's something that I was already thinking about. Like maybe I should be taking notes on this already.
Right.
But yeah, okay, that was super helpful.
Yeah. So you could, it depends on how flexible your tool is, but like if you're using something like UXfolio or Simplice, any of the ones I'm showing you, you can do it straight in the tool pretty easily, or you could like do what I was saying a second ago and like pull it into Notion, just make a little widget right here and type it real quick just to have that information. And the thing I do too, like as I'm going, is actually drop the links to the thing I'm referring to here, so I can like keep track of them myself when I'm going through the project, but then I remove them for the actual portfolio. So the thing that's interesting here is like, you can see like this generated with a kind of an overview, a section header where you can like split things up. It has a sketches piece. So it's like, hey, upload your sketches here and write about your sketches. Has a wireframes piece, has the UI design piece, and then it has like a wrap up piece, right? So the thing I really love about UXfolio actually has nothing to do with the layouts. Like the layouts are fine, it all works. You can add a section at any time, right? So this says, here's basic sections. So the downside to UXfolio is there's a little bit of loss of flexibility in the UI design, but I actually say that's a massive positive, because if you're someone that's looking to break into the UX industry, you don't need to be working on both like designing and building a website for your portfolio and the case studies. Those are two projects. So like the thing I was explaining in the portfolio presentation class is like, you don't actually want to design a portfolio site right now, because that is a whole nother project. It's a whole nother UX project that you now have to spin up and do alongside writing all these case studies, which are already going to take you a bunch of time. It's like what I'm saying when I'm like, hey, use a template. 95% of people use a template, and then we just change a couple things out because you don't want to actually build a website. So I'll give you a good example. Like I used to run a web design business, and our business was designing other people's websites. Our website, I hired someone to build. you'd be like, why would you do that, right? Our website didn't need to be done by us because it wasn't part of our business. So kind of think of it that same way. Like your business is what you're presenting within this package, not necessarily the website itself. You can go in and make customizations later if you want to, but like it's not what we're measuring you on. We're measuring you on the quality of your output. So we're less concerned about your website. But the thing that's interesting with UXfolio is these sections here. So it says sections with text ideas, right? So if I come in and I click something like card sort, and this is very simple, but it's something that makes it incredibly easy to do. It has these guiding questions here. So what I do is I normally just come in here and it says, what was your main purpose? What navigation problems did you have? And I just come in here and I answer these exact things. And now you have all the things that a hiring manager was looking for right here without having to do like much else. So that's actually why I use this, because like I know what people are looking for and I'll still forget it in the midst of this process. And so I just use this to keep myself on track. And so I come here, use this as a way to guide my process, answer these questions. And then I ported all my stuff into Notion or into Simplease after the fact. So that's how I actually built my entire website. How do you keep track of process? Oh, that's what you already asked. Okay. Yeah. Good. So yeah, so this right here is like the primary feature. And so what I did was, you saw how when I tried to make a new case study, it was like prompting me for payment. You can actually make 2 case studies for free. And so I would make a case study, use all the guiding questions, update them all, and then I would port them over to my Simplease site, and I would delete that case study out and do it again. So like I've never paid for UXfolio because I already had Simplease. But if I didn't have Simplease already and I was starting from scratch to build a new website, I would have just used this. I would have never even done anything else. The reason why is because like if you look at my Simplease site, like it looks visually different, but that's because I put a lot of effort into this over time. You can get UXfolio close to this. It's just a block of text in a square widget with an image under it, then a block of text in a square widget with an image under it, or it's a side by side where it's like there's an image on the left and a block of text on the right. That's all it ever is. And so you can get the exact same output with like UXfolio, where you can just come in and say, hey, you know what, I want image and text. It'll put your image over here, a block of text over here. You can swap the positions if you want. So you have all of the same kind of formatting options that you would normally have without all the hassle of building it. So it took to get my Simplease website to act that same way. It wasn't necessarily that hard, but there's a lot more to it. So I had to build my first case study out, which took me like 24 to 30 hours to get like all the appropriate spacing, all the appropriate fonts. And here it would have taken me like 2 hours. So that's the difference. And if you pay for it, you can do custom fonts, custom background colors, stuff like that. So you can get the exact same look if you wanted to. So it's not a huge benefit to use some of these other pieces. So, and Adobe Portfolio has some similarities, and there's a little bit of flexibility in like how you build things, and I'll show you that in a second. But it's not as, the output is not as like visually appealing, I would say. But I'll kind of show you how you would go about building this case study now. So let's say we actually wanted to get a very similar, and the other thing I would say too is like, feel free to like just use concepts or constructs from other people's sites. So Jonathan, you've heard me say this a bunch, but like when you're going across making a case study, I think the thing that really intimidates people is like you're trying to build the whole thing. So the way I actually look at it, and it's kind of to the answer I gave you a second ago, is like build it block by block. And you kind of have a framework of like, I know I'm going to do overview, that I'm going to do challenge, that I'm going to do design process, research, blah, blah. Only care about one block at a time. Like, oh, I'm going to build the overview block right now. Get that right, and then go forward. So what we'll do right now is like, if I jump into UXfolio and I just want to build an overview block, it's already there by default. And it's like, hey, do you want to just answer this? And so I already have cheated and I have all this information in Notion. So like, if I have this information up front, you can just copy and paste it in. Otherwise, you can just say, hey, this is who I was working with. It asks you all the right questions. Like, when did you start working on this? What was your role? Who was the client? Right. And if you just answer those really quickly, you get the right outcome. And so all I ever do in here is answer those questions. I have a very brief, and it does well. Like if you just answer one sentence for each one, you get a pretty good outcome without having a lot of descriptive text. But you can just come in here and replace this. And now we have pretty much the exact same thing that I have here, just without a blue background. You know, so like it's already done. And I think you actually, like if I paid for this, you can change this background color. So like I can actually add media behind this, even like a video or image or whatever. And if I had the paid version, there'd be a little icon here where I could actually change this background color and change these things. So like it's pretty flexible. I can change the color of the text right here, and you can change all the different like fonts across. So I would do this at a global level, not like at an individual level, and then it would just apply to everything. And pairings is the other thing. So you can actually pair different fonts up. So like if you wanted to, this Work Sans font is always now paired with this Laura font, right? So like that's how you design a lot of the time anyways. Like you're going to put two fonts together. This saves so much time because in Simplice, I have to do those individually every single time. Just go through and update them. So what I did in Simplice was I made one giant case study where everything was right, and I just duplicate it all the time. So I don't have to redo this over and over again. So there's different ways to go about kind of working through. So that's an upgrade feature as well. But so now that I have that, like all you really do from here on out is you're going through and just populating this information. And so some of the things, see, this one has a background color. So I might even be wrong here. I might be able to change this. But I think if you select the right, you can kind of game the system here. If you select the right type, like if you select section header, it's going to give you a background, even in the unpaid version. But it's a little bit less flexible. I'll just pay for it. So it's not that bad. It's like $9 a month. But yeah, it's really simple too. So if I come through and I want to start adding things like this is like my cover page, right? So I can just come to the top, hit change background, upload it here. And then the cool thing is like you can adjust things like the opacity. Like if I want this a little dim, I can do it kind of live. It's very good with live editing. So like maybe I just want it about here. I'm good. It's great. Oh, I didn't save it. Yeah, so we'll put it around here. Cool. Change background. We're done. So then we can continue forward with like adding whatever additional things here. So like I think in my thing, it says something like designing a portable cash register, right? Or whatever I had for my homepage, I would just add right here. And whatever you add here as a subtitle, it actually goes on your landing page too. So like I'll just put subtitle here, and I'll show you how the landing page works in a second as well. And then the rest of it works very similarly. You can just add, delete sections at any given time. And it's pretty straightforward. So I could just map this directly. Like if you already had an existing kind of document, you can easily map this directly. I think the one thing I'll show you is like how images work. So I can actually add an entire section around like images or video, right? So this one, you actually host the videos externally, and then you just drop it on YouTube or something, and then I would just mark it as private and then paste it here. So like I have on my YouTube some of my old like interaction videos. So this is the workflow I always use. So if I go into my channel, I look at videos, there should be, yeah, all videos. Or maybe I deleted them recently, but I used to have like things here with my interactions. So let's just take one of these other videos that I did with my daughter. We'll bring it here and you can kind of see how it works. You can also now decide like, hey, autoplay this, loop this video, mute it. So like you can make a 2 or 3 second video loop and just have it completely looping over and over again to show a specific interaction, which I actually like this a lot because this saves a ton of time. So like with a lot of other tools, you do this looping system by making GIFs. So like you'll go into like Printable or one of these other tools and you'll export GIFs and you have to make all these preloaded GIFs and then you have to make sure they populate right. And then you have to make sure that they're not breaking. If you just have a video that's short and you just post it to YouTube and just let it loop, it's quite simple to just do that from here. And then you can add captions, things like that. If the other thing is like, if you ever want to, the way that UX Folio works is it has a few presets. So like they always know that you might want to add text next to a video or to an image. So they have a video with text, image with text type of template. So you can always like, if you drop the video and you decide, hey, I want to add text that's just there and it's available, you can add it after the fact, or you can flip them if you want on the left and right, or you can just remove it later if you want the video there and then you want the text underneath. So it doesn't provide a lot of like advanced column control in this tool, but it kind of just presets everything and makes it as simple as possible. So you can get a good layout pretty quickly without dealing with a bunch of design as you're going. Any questions on this one as well? Is there anything you want to see that hasn't been shown? That's the other question. I think the main things here are like the guiding questions, and then using how you use the column systems and how you upload these things. The other thing I'll show you in here is like the primary templates for like home pages and things. So this is cool too. When you go to publish, you can decide like what you want the thumbnail to be. It can either be from that primary image up top. If you're noticing here, it's actually pulling from the UI design section. It'll be like, oh, you put a UI design section in there. That's probably what you want your thumbnail to be. So it'll pull that from it. It's actually quite cool. And you don't have to go out. This is another thing that's a pain a lot of the time. You have to go out Photoshop. You make a very particular thumbnail image in a very particular size, and you have to throw it in here. This is just done by default. So it's kind of cool. So then this
Cameron,
also,
I did.
yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I did have one question just in terms of your workflow. It sounds like you're using UX Folio for kind of some of the guiding questions.
Yep.
And then you bring those into Notion, or are you writing it out in Notion kind of with these as sort of the guiding questions?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixture. Like what I start before I had Notion, I would just populate these guiding questions in here and then I just write it directly. Now what I'm doing is I actually do the same thing that you just said, kind of generate the flow, take the guiding questions and throw them in Notion and answer them. The reason I do that is because then I can share my Notion document with people and they can comment more easily. So like they can tell me like, hey, this is not as strong as you think, or it's better. One thing that I would say UX Folio is doing quite well though now, and so you might not have to do that. There's actually a way to get feedback now directly in UX Folio. I'll show you that too in just a second. This is one other thing I was going to call out too. This is interesting because like if you ever share, this is showing like your sharing settings. So like, oh, if this hits Google or Facebook or something, it's going to share like this. So you can have a particular way that you want here as well of like how it's going to show up on a share link, which is kind of interesting. But I'll show you kind of what you were just asking around getting feedback as well, because that's why I'm using Notion primarily. So you can always share the link, but it doesn't get the feedback directly in here, right? But there's also this one other feature that they added maybe a year ago at this point, where you can actually go to the reviews tab here. So what reviews does is it allows you to receive feedback from people on your UX Folio case studies. So this is a really awesome feature. You can get reviews from either experts in the community or other designers in the community, right? So like, and the way they do it is community driven. So you have to earn karma points by like giving reviews on other people's things to then be able to get karma points to request a review. So I could go into like Patrick's thing. And then this is literally what I was saying about like the hiring manager process. It's telling you check on the case studies and see if you see these things, right? So like now I'm going to go through and I'll be like, so this is in Spanish, so I'm not able to really read a lot of this. But if I go in, I could translate to English really quick. Cool. So now we know. All right. So now it's showing role and project. So I can come and say, cool, I see your role. I see that this is about the Tetris design system. I see the scenario and problem. So I could check off like the challenge. I can read it really quick. Then you come through, okay, cool, I see a solution. So there's some deliverables here, some learnings. There's a workshop. So a little bit around like process description, I would say. We see some user insights now around personas, explanation of design decisions. It says a little bit around like what his principles are, how he was able to like conduct these things. So we see this. I would say we see the outcomes of the UX methods actually more than explanation of decisions. Then we see, so you can come through and like mark these things off. And then like we see some construction goes on, here's a final outcome. And then we didn't see the personal learnings, right? So like you can do this kind of thing. Then you can come and you say, this is what I really like, this is what I don't like, blah, blah. And you give feedback that way. And then you continue forward and ask a couple more questions that are more specific. And then it'll submit this, you'll get one karma point. And then you can go out. And now that I have a karma point, I actually come in and from here I can hit ask for review. And for one karma point, it'll send it to everyone on UX Folio. For 2 karma points, it'll send it specifically to an expert. So you can say, hey, I want an expert review of this. So it'll send it to like someone that's part of their design community. And then you can get reviews that way. So this is another good way to like get reviews from people. And also I think a huge skill set is also like giving feedback on other designs. So this helps you with that as well. It's a good way to get reviews from people that you don't know. And it's like, hey, they'll be a little bit more constructive as well. So I actually think this is a big strength. Jonathan, did you use this when you used UXfolio at all?
Oh, the review?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually gave one review to one other random person, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much all I used.
Cool. Yeah, so it's a pretty cool process because like you can get feedback pretty easily, and just by like doing 1 or 2 reviews, you can submit your stuff for review over and over again. So it's kind of cool. I'll show you one case study that I did as a really brief like demonstration for like the prototyping class I put together. So this is like what a final UXfolio case study would look like. So if we hit view mode, you could come in, you say, hey, cool. So I did like a prayer app. It's like, what is this? So here's my overview. At that point, I knew how to change the background color. So like there's a way to do it. So you can change the background color and drop in some of these things here. Then I wrote the goal out like, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Very, very scannable. Identifying the user types. We wrote some personas. We had like, hey, here's the sketching and ideation, some really high level sketches. It's like, cool. We came up with some inspiration here. Prototyping and testing. We were doing a research plan. We did some prototyping. So here's one of the other key strengths. When you want to embed a prototype in UXfolio, you can embed the actual live prototype. So this is just like an InVision link, and you see like that's InVision. So I can actually like click through this without having to like go out and record a video of this. They can actually play with it themselves right here within the case study without me having to do a whole bunch of stuff here, which is pretty cool.
Does that work with Figma as well?
I think it does now. So yeah, I think there's a Figma. At the time before, it was like just InVision, but since Figma has shareable links, any of the ones with shareable links, Marvel, Figma, InVision, there's one other one. I think it's Proto.io works with this as well. UX, there's another one I can't remember. It's like called like UX Toolkit or something. It doesn't work, but it's because of a security issue on their side. But yeah. And then you can just kind of, this is really what it would look like. And you can come through and adjust things like margins and padding if you wanted to, but it's very similar in structure and look and feel as the one that I took like 30 hours to do. And this took me like less than an hour to put this together once we had kind of the information, right? Cool. Any questions other than on this particular thing? I'm going to show you the templates really quick too, just to give you a high level on this. So homepage templates, right? So this is where you can kind of decide how your whole website is going to look. I think a lot of these are actually quite good. So if you look, they're kind of small here, but you can do something like this where it's like, hey, here's a bigger image of yourself with your name, a description, your social links, and then your portfolio pieces right underneath. A sidebar view with your portfolio pieces, same type of thing. More focus on you and your work. The one I'm using now is kind of like a split view. But like all these template layouts are very similar to what you see on like the majority of people's portfolios. So you don't have to go design and build these things out. Like even, and right now I can switch this and it'll just switch them immediately to that other view. This is very similar to the one I have on my Simplease site. Or I can say, oh, you know what, I'm feeling this today. Like you could just swap it so easily. And a lot of this information is coming like from your profile. So, and I can change it right here. Anything that I want to change, edit my social links. Here's all my social stuff. I can just pop it in right there. So any of these things are easily changeable. And you can have a completely different layout within a click if you want to, right? So you can go between any of these, and they're all pretty standard like UX person portfolios. So this is the one Landon was using. You saw that one earlier. But it's perfectly fine to have a template that's similar to other people's. I think the majority, kind of like I was saying before, like familiarity is a real design principle. It helps you with navigation and understanding how the user experience is going to work. So it's fine to have something similar. Let's see. Yep. And then if you want additional pages, you actually add them here. And you can like go in, edit the about page. You can delete this page altogether if you don't want it. You can add completely new ones. So like if you had a really big project that you wanted people to see, or like a portfolio present or like a presentation, you can just drop it as a link, or like, oh, I have a blog, and you can actually drop it as a external link if you want to, like, oh, I have a Medium that I'm going to add here, things like that. this one's pretty flexible. It allows for quite a lot of, really, it's not a lot of control, but it's a lot of like the things that you want, and a lot of the nonsense is removed, I would say, like the stuff that you have to do when you're building a bigger website, and you have to deal more with like font spacing, padding, all those things is kind of taken out, so you don't have to deal with all that stuff. So I'll talk to you a little bit about Adobe Portfolio as well. So this is what you get when you first log in. So my advice here is, if you already pay for Creative Cloud, this is free. So you can come in and use this for free. The hosting's free, everything. So like if you don't want to pay for something, you don't want to spin up a site, you don't want to spend a lot of time, and you already pay for Creative Cloud, this is why you would want to look into Adobe Portfolio. It's pretty good. It's pretty powerful. It's not it's not going to be like all of the stress of building a website again. It's going to be a little bit more straightforward. So there's a caveat to Portfolio because it does have some limitations, and the limitations are a little annoying. The reason the limitations are there is because it's really more built for photography portfolios. So when you first go into this, you're going to see like that the presets are more for photographers, but you can get what you want after the fact. So they have a lot of very similar, like decent portfolio layouts up front. So you can just come in and be like, oh, you know what? I want this one today. And yeah, I just want a very simple portfolio layout with pages. I'm going to use this theme. So this is just going to generate an entire site built on that exact theme. So there's a work page, there's a contact page, similar. So not as similar to UXfolio. This is a little bit more customization thing. So you have these pages customization, so you can add, remove pages from here. Like I don't want a contact page right now, or I don't want a work page. Like it'll toggle off. It's telling me I can't toggle that one off because it's my last page, right? But you can just toggle them on and off, which is nice. Integration. So this is kind of what I was getting at about it being more photographer friendly. There are people that put like their UX stuff on Behance, but you can integrate all of these things like Lightroom, Adobe Stock, or Behance. I don't have any Behance projects, but if I did, right, maybe I built my whole portfolio on Behance, I could just attach them right here and I have a portfolio made, which is kind of cool. Yeah, portfolio Creative Cloud is like $20 a month. Yeah, if you use the discount, which is pretty nice, because you're already going to have to pay like $10 or $20 a month for like another web builder tool if you're going to do it. Themes. So like at any given time, similar to UXfolio, I could say, you know what, I'm going to abandon my current theme. I'm going to switch to this theme, and it'll just readjust everything, which is nice. You don't have to go through a lot of building process, which is cool. Then settings, these are more global things. So like I can connect, and UXfolio has this too, but let's say I want to have my personal domain. I can connect any domain. So you see like my friend Terrace is using Adobe Portfolio. He just has his own domain. So if I type in his domain, it'll come up. Same with Landon on UXfolio. So you can do your domain here. You can choose which homepage you want. So if you have multiple pages, so these are all the higher level options. You can do Google Analytics if you want to. All this stuff is here. You normally don't need this. All I see people messing with is domain name and homepage. That's pretty much all you need. And then you can do a lot of your site-wide customizations here. So like you might want a whole background. You might want like a certain font across your entire thing. Maybe we're going to use Tahoma, right? Maybe we want a dark theme. I'm a really big fan of dark themes, so that's what we're going to do, right? And you just hit publish and everything updates. So it's pretty quick. Lastly, so this is where things get a little weird. So you have these weird like toggles plus drop down things. So you can turn on or off like features pretty easily. So you have a little bit more adjustability of the template. When you go in here, you can say, oh, I don't want a logo, but I want a caption. So you can turn individual pieces on and off a little bit more easier. Then this container, this is where you adjust things at a finer level. So like, let's say I want more space between this logo and this work area. I can just like adjust the padding right here of individual areas. So every single piece of this tool has like this kind of container piece that you can go into and individually fine tune padding and things like that. Same with navigation. So like I can turn on or off any piece of this thing. So like the whole nav is going to be here when I start building this out. And I can say, oh, you know what? I really don't want social, or I don't want subpage titles. So like those are the subtitles of each of the pages. I'm just going to want high level things. And there's a footer. So like at the bottom, you'll see this footer. Maybe I don't want that Adobe Portfolio footer. I'll just turn it off, right? So like those are all kind of here. in the sidebar. So those are the main ones. But the core of this is kind of similar to everything else. You have this kind of add page flow. So you hit add page and you have, this is what I was saying again, like you can drop a Lightroom album directly in here if you have a bunch of photos, which is cool. But we'll probably use a page. And let's say I'm going to use that Express Pay as a thing. You can make an entire thing your homepage. So let's say you go and make a page that you like better than this template. You can say, hey, you know what, this is my new template. And you can link it to places. You can make your own template as the homepage if you want as well. I'm going to create this page and it's going to load up here. And so it's very similar to like an email builder, actually, if you've ever used one of those like MailChimp or things like that. It just drops all the widgets right in the main page. And you'll see there's a slight difference between UXFolio's approach and Adobe Portfolio. Adobe Portfolio expects you to build the column system how you want, where UXFolio gave you the column system. It kind of pre-built all those things. So let's say I want to start with like an overview. It's just going to be some text. So I'll go back to Notion and like steal from my earlier stuff. You notice like anytime I don't save it or like populate something, it will just kind of delete. So in here, you can just go in and say, hey, you know, I want this to be the header, or maybe not that big. I'll do a subheader, maybe like a 24 bold. And sometimes the bold doesn't work. And if that's happening, it's because your font doesn't have a bold. You just have to go in here and pick the bold font. So that one throws me for a loop sometimes. But let's just say, hey, I want to go in here and I can quickly change this to white. Cool. And so that's the first one. So now I'm going to add like another widget. I would just click here and you have all the widgets right here. So it's like, okay, cool. Next, I'm going to add maybe an image. Let's say we want to show like my banner image next to some text. So I'll put in, here's some image of the UI design. So it's just going to drop in everything as a new block, which is kind of the format that you want. You want blocks all the time. And then next, this is where it's kind of cool and also kind of can throw you for a loop if you get into a lot of design here. You can just hit text and now it's like split view. And I'm going to explain like, this is my UI design, right? So I can now have a split view, do the same thing here, maybe change this color. Now I can actually decide how much of a split I want here, which is kind of nice. So you can just drag this out and be like, hey, I want a 70-30 split where 70% of it's here, 30% of it's there. You can also, the thing that's a little bit tricky with Portfolio is that a lot of the time tools like this have a row feature where it's like, oh, let me select this whole row and I'll do like things with this row. Adobe Portfolio doesn't have that. It actually kind of does, but it's not in the way you would expect. So you don't select the row, you just select anything in the row. And like you see at this top corner, I can hit this drop down. So you can hit reorder page content. You can be like, now all your rows are here. So I can like rearrange these rows if you want to, or I could do with alignment and margins, right? And now this is actually going to affect just this left side, which is kind of annoying because the other thing was at the row level and this is just on this side, right? So like if I wanted 60 pixels above and below, I'm now going to have to adjust it there and here because there's no like row construct in Adobe Portfolio. It's a couple of additional clicks. So you just have to keep in mind like what your margins and things are while you're doing this, because you do have to do it multiple times just because there's not a row feature. But you can build out an entire, and I guess the one other thing that's not beneficial with not having rows is you can't like duplicate a row now and just change pieces of it. You have to add those things individually. So like I could just go in and add another one. The thing that makes Simplease a little faster is I can just duplicate this row above and then change things. But you can see you can kind of get to a similar layout pretty quickly. Most of it's around text formatting, things like that. So if you spent time here, and the other thing I'll say too is they have Adobe font integration. So like you see, there's a bunch of different Adobe fonts. So if you're really big into like fonts, these are the only ones I have right now. You can get some fonts from Adobe Fonts, add them in here, and you can customize all of your fonts and things based on what you have from Adobe Fonts. So if you do have the Creative Cloud subscription, this isn't a bad option at all. Let me see, there's a site here, or a question here. Have you encountered any sites built with these tools not loading, displaying? I actually haven't. That's actually one of the big positives with like these particular tools is I was kind of mentioning this thing about rows and columns. So a lot of these builders, the reason this works is you have, when you're building a tool like this has the flex for any sort of like row and column that I'm about to do. So it's already kind of responsively designed. So if someone loads it on a phone, it's going to respond the same way. So when you build a visual editor, you have to build it responsive or else it doesn't work. That's why I think a lot of these tools work well whenever you do get to different adaptive sizes, where if you're building something that's a little bit more in code or has a little bit more technical background, it might not always have these Flexbox type things built into it by default. Cool. Yeah, so you can kind of get the gist here. You can kind of go through and easily like just populate, add things. There's a little bit of a more manual way of building it, but you have more control, right? So you have more control over the row the row distributions, things like that, which that's a positive and a negative as you're trying to build things. But there's a common, I think one of the limitations too, like there's a common desire to build like a 3-column thing. They don't have the ability to do 3 columns. You can only do 2 columns. And if you want to go add a third one, you won't be able to. So it's always going to be 2-column split. So if you go back to like UXfolio, it always has 2 columns too. So like all you're really getting at here is you can adjust the widths a little bit more. You have more control over the typography, and you have a little bit more control over just the way the layout looks because you're building the blocks yourself. So those are the 3 differences here, but there are limitations in layout, and you have it'll take you a little bit more time to design something. And there's a little bit more limitations on like the actual, the building of this, but there's more flexibility on the template management. So if you want your site to look a bit more unique, you'll have more flexibility here than with UXfolio. And again, like I would always advise to use UXfolio to like help generate content, because those content blocks are going to be helpful. So even if you end up wanting to build stuff in Portfolio, it'll be easy to generate your content from there. Any questions here as well? I think one of the things that's cool about this too that I didn't show, and I'll show you real quick, again with videos. So you saw on UXfolio, you had to host on YouTube, and then I would go attach it. On Portfolio, you can actually upload. This is kind of really awesome about this, but also it's not a necessity, but it's just kind of cool. You can upload any format, right? So this is like a QuickTime movie that I'm going to upload real quick. You'll upload any format of video, and it's going to upload, and it'll successfully like translate it into an H.264 format for web without you having to do any processing. So like I think this comes from them owning things like Premiere and Media Encoder, where they can just do it on the back end. So like I can just drop this in here, and once this kind of loads up, I can just wait, and it'll be a placeholder here, and it'll say, hey, it might take a few minutes to several hours depending on the size. And then I can just use it as if it was another piece of content. And then when it's done, it'll just live populate in there, and it can play and things like that. So that's actually kind of cool if you don't want to deal with a lot of video rendering or hosting and things like that. You can just drop them directly into Adobe Portfolio. So if you are going to use more video content, you might want to consider either getting a YouTube channel with a private host for UXfolio, or just using Adobe Portfolio and dropping them directly in here. Cool. Any questions on this one? All right, I'm actually going to take a quick bathroom break, and then I'm going to show you Simplease, and I'll be right back. All right. I was going to say too, the one other thing about Portfolio that's really awesome is you can actually build different sites. So you see it says you can create up to 5 sites. So something that I've seen people do for interviews is they'll actually build different portfolio sites for different interviews. So like if you're interviewing at different people, you can drop them in. So embedding InVision links, yes, you can. It's not as simple. So I didn't mean to click that. So there's an HTML component that you can just kind of add free code. So you just go into InVision. You at the top right corner, it says like export as a HTML link. So you see that video is now in here now that we've like come back to this, but you can just come in here and import and embed. And so you can just drop I'll actually can show you really quick, but you come in, you hit edit embed code, and the embed code comes up right over here. And you just drop the InVision embed code right there. So I can show you really quickly with like something that I'm working on. Oops. So yeah, let me just grab this one. So right here, there is normally a embed code here. So it might be, it looks like they removed it. Let me see where they put it. It might be a limitation because I'm on the Amazon one, but normally there's like a live embed right underneath manage share links. And you click that and it generates a piece of code. You just copy it and you paste it right into that like code box, and then it'll actually preview live right here. I think we have a security limitation on the Amazon, so that's why I can't do it, but that's normally where it is. Does that answer your question? Cool. All right, so now I'm going to show you Simplice. So like Simplice is the one I use because of a few pretty distinct reasons. And I'm actually on an older version. So some of the things I said were limitations before have been fixed. So if you bought it now, it'll be better. So this was built by a designer as a way to like make case studies. It's literally built for making case studies. So you see here, he's even advertising new features around like, hey, how does this split view work? He's got a whole bunch of pre-built templates again, because like nobody actually wants to design a case study site. They just want to use a bunch of things to get their information as quickly as possible. There's a lot of presets that are really nice and set up. There's a lot of different ways to present things. But I'll show you, this one's a little bit more advanced, but I'll just show you a new project flow. So if I came in, there's pages, so I can create anything as a page and you can set anything as your front page. So like when there's no like template selector, I can just say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna make a new work page. You can add it to your menu or not. You can decide if it's going to be a cover slide or a page. So like cover slide is kind of the thing you just saw where it was just sliding between things, or a page. And I can say, hey, you know what? I want a new page. And you can either use a template. So you can actually use any other page you've built before as a template, use some of their existing templates, or you can just start building by like dragging and dropping stuff from this top bar. So they have this thing called modules where I'm in an old version, but now in the new version, you can save anything you've made as a module. So like I was saying before, like on Simplice had to go through and edit the font every single time. So like if I made a row and I save it as a module, I don't have to do that anymore, but that's how it was in the old one. So when I very first started Simplice, I didn't have the homepage I had. I was like, hey, I want to just get this started as quickly as possible. So I just dropped this portfolio grid in. And if you drag it and drop it in, it's just going to pull in all your other pages as a pre-built portfolio. So like there are some templates that are pre-built as a module. And I can say, hey, you know what? I want a header, or I want something different at the top. You can just pull and drag stuff in from the section header. And then if you hit edit, like everything becomes a toolbar at the top. So I can say, hey, I want my name here. And I'm going to adjust things like padding and stuff. So like I can come here and say, hey, I want my name big. I want it to be not strike through. I want it to use bold. So I have, you see here, like these are my custom fonts I've loaded in. You can load in custom fonts and set those up. It's pretty straightforward. So it's not too hard. And maybe I want that to be like this. I can say my line height, I want it to be like 64. So you see there's a little bit more like design to this. So there's going to be some controls here. For that, I can do like the spacing between the text, all that kind of stuff is right here. and then the text color, stuff like that. So maybe I want this to be lighter. So like here, you can actually save like colors that you're going to use a lot, and you can save them straight to this toolbar, and you'll be able to hit them wherever. And then I kind of mentioned like there's no rows or columns in Adobe Portfolio. There are rows and columns here. So this is the thing that will throw you for a loop when you first start. But you see, I click this and it says column. And then it shows like, oh, there's content in the column. There's a column selector, and then there's a section selector. So I can pick any of these and like control, oh, I want the column to be 6 width, not 12 width, right? So the 12 width is like a full width page. I can say, hey, I want this to be 8. I'm going to drop a picture of myself to the right of this. So now I can say, oh, cool. And I can select this as the column, and oh, I really want that to be 2 or whatever, right? So you can actually do a lot of control over the columns and the spacing and things like that. And I can have this whole section be like, hey, you know what? I want this section to have padding of 88 on each side. And then I want this to be like slightly different background. So maybe I'll make it like slightly grayish, right? So like you can control a lot of the visuals and the layout with Simplice pretty quickly, which is where the differences are. From there, like, and the reason I say you don't have to use this, it's more like if you want to put that extra time into like the visual editing, you're essentially building the same layouts that you're building in all the other ones. So like you're just going to do like 2 column layouts and things like that. All you're really controlling more of here is exactly how it lays out, some fonts again, and some background colors. So like you can totally get the same effect that's necessary to land a job with any of these tools without the work that's needed here. So what I would honestly suggest is go build your entire portfolio out in UXfolio or Adobe Portfolio, whatever is the easiest. And then if you get extra time, you're like, hey, I want to upgrade this to a more custom site, then you grab this and then you add these additional layers on top, right? So, and Jonathan's heard me say this before, but I'm like, I basically had everybody in our class like drop Squarespace and build it on UXfolio. Like you can land a job right now with UXfolio, and it's going to help you, and you can get feedback, and you can do all these other things. If you have Creative Cloud already and you don't want to pay extra money, use Portfolio, use the type kits. You can do a little bit more with Typekit, but push that to the end. Content is king here. All of your content's first, and then drop your images in after the fact. And then if you want to, and you want to spend a little bit more time on like a design project, then you come in here and you build all these things out. Or if you're going to use this, right? Because we have people that use this, just use the presets. Use the presets to start. It'll get you where you need to go, and then come in and make your own custom modules later and things like that. So like that's my biggest advice, because again, as a UX person, and this is what I kind of meant, the difference between like a UX portfolio and a UI portfolio, we are so interested in your thought process. So like you could send me a PDF describing the way that you went about designing something, and I'll be just as impressed as looking at your website. So think of it that way. If you're going to be positioning yourself where you are going to try to showcase yourself a little bit more as a visual designer or someone that has UI skills, then consider using something like Simplice. So you can say, hey, one of my bigger skill sets is visual design, and I want to showcase my visual design as part of my portfolio. That's the only time I would advise doing this up front. So we had in the portfolio class, I think there was 2 people that wanted to like specialize a little bit more in visual design, and one of them used UXfolio and just like put a lot of really great UI stuff on there, and it was fine. The other one used Simplice to like try to show their visual background a little bit more. But it's really more about what you select and showcase and how you explain your decisions from a UX perspective than anything else. So if you can do that effectively, pick the tool that gets you there the fastest. Like that's essentially what you want to do.
Cool.
Yeah, Jonathan, you can explain what happened with your Squarespace site and then how you transitioned it to UXfolio. That would be helpful.
Yeah, like I started with Squarespace, and it was just a huge, steep learning curve, like to put it mildly. Like, I think the biggest problem for me with the Squarespace is putting out the layout. Like, it wasn't very linear. It wasn't very simple to follow. But when I used UXfolio, like the layout was very simple. It was very easy to follow through, and it was very linear. So yeah, just like I said, UXfolio helped me a lot with making the layout of my case studies.
Yeah, I think the funny thing was like at one point, Jonathan kind of followed the process I was talking about where he kind of wrote it up in a Word document first or a Google Doc and we would review it and be like, oh, this is great. And he transitioned to Squarespace and it had all these, he had to make all these layout decisions. We were like, we can't even follow your case study anymore. Like what happened? I was like, this isn't the same case study, but it was the exact same content. And because it was laid out in a different way, it made it harder to follow. So like something that I meant to mention before, but I'll mention now is like, it's actually quite important that you don't break some of these formats, because if you have all these 3-column things or multi-column things where you're telling a story sideways instead of vertically, it breaks the scannability and it breaks the readability. So that's actually what happened with yours, was like you had some content on the left and some more content in the middle and some like written content left, right, left, middle, right. And then we read top, bottom, left, right. So we weren't really paying attention the same way and it was breaking the continuity. So like as much as all these things are doing these horizontal layouts where you kind of focus on left aligned text or center aligned text and you just break it down very similarly because it's the easiest thing to scan and easiest thing to read.
The thing I didn't like about Squarespace was that like there was very limited layouts that you could use, and I wanted to be able to play with it a little bit more, but I don't know the coding very well, and so for me, like all the technical aspect was difficult. But then like I kind of was like, okay, I just want to choose something, and I'll go, and I picked one thinking I could change it later.
Right, you
It
can't.
turns out like if you want, like if you tie your domain to a layout,
Game over.
in order to change that without having all this coding experience, you have to create a completely different site, reload all the content, all this stuff. And I just really didn't like that inflexibility there.
Yeah, and that's actually why these are like more for designers. So you see all of these, they have like, there's this separation of concerns. Like you go build pages of all your different case studies, right? And then all of these like templating systems, like even this one, I hit some like grid system and it just read from the pages. It's like your pages are separate, like your content case study pages are separate from the layout. Or when you're working in something that's closer to code, right? Those are tightly knit together. So like you're not able to flexibly make changes the way that you would expect. And like if you do want to do something where you're wanting to control it more, like this is that middle ground where it's like, hey, I have all those pages structures and I can sit here and change my theme like 4 or 5 times here and I'll keep all my content the same. It's no problem, right? So but Squarespace is not that. It is definitely more of a technical tool. It's really built for like e-commerce sites, and then it happened to expand to other things. But they're really good at marketing, so that's where you land in places like this. Yeah.
The websites they make look fantastic. But
Yeah, they're great. Yeah, I've never been able to make one like they make on Squarespace, unless I programmed it like raw. Cool. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah, I think Jonathan, your whole site is on UXfolio now, right?
Yeah, at the moment it is. It's all on UXfolio.
I'm gonna pull it up.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, and I'll send some links out too to like all these different things. And like there's actually a discount. So the guy that makes Simplease, if you're interested in Simplease, he does a discount every Black Friday. So perfect timing. So he will he will send on his site, if you hit it on Black Friday, there's like a 60% discount. It'll be like in between $40 and $100 depending on which one we like. So if you really like Simplease, like I would highly advise the Studio Edition. I got the single edition because I'm a little bit more comfortable with code, but this thing here, Design with Blocks, this is what I was talking about. Like there's a lot of predefined templates that you can just drop pieces in. It's all these modules that are just there and you can just slide them in and you don't have to do any of that layout stuff I was just doing. So like it's worth the additional $40 or so if you're going to use Simplease. It's definitely worth it. There's a lot more things around like there's Instagram modules and things like social modules. I hard coded my module on my site because I didn't pay for this additional thing, but like there's new updates that are worth it. Cool. Yeah, no problem. Cool. Yeah, Larry, if there's a email list of everyone, I'll send out like all these links and some high level, like here's the pricing details and here's the information that can get you started with each of these things.
Or if you want to make it easy on yourself, just send it to me and we'll get it
Cool.
back out.
Yeah, that sounds good.
This was tremendous, was it not, everyone?
Amazing.
I mean, you packed a ton in here to 90 minutes. Very impressive.
Thanks.
And early on, I said I was not going to not apologize for recommending you do more of a headline approach to writing your case studies, but I think I will apologize, particularly if some of you were in a very early cohort, because back then we were pushing Squarespace, because there really UXfolio didn't exist, Simplease didn't exist, and if you wanted to make a site and stay away from coding, I think even maybe this one's debatable, but it felt like at the time Squarespace was easier to deal with than WordPress. But anyway, if you took that advice 3 years ago, I'm terribly sorry. Do you accept my apology?
Of course, Larry.
Yeah, I think it's hard though, because, you know, some people were, because I graduated in January, and even then our instructor was pushing Squarespace as well. So I think it just is also kind of personal preference of the instructors. So, but I think this was super, super helpful and really valuable. And I really am like, okay, I need to migrate from Squarespace. So
Squarespace. That's a great name.
Squarespace, yeah.
I don't know if you're having this class as part of the cohort, the next cohort, but I think it should be, because this was invaluable. Like trying to figure it out on your own as you're already like underwater trying to write your case studies, you know, this was insane. And it was an hour and a half, but it was like, oh, okay, I have different options and I'm not just trying to like figure it out on my own while I'm already like drowning. So this, I think it should be part of the cohort if possible.
It would be good. We'll just sign Cam to a lifetime contract.
That's fine. I was going to say too, like kind of what Paul just said, like, I think it's really important to, as you were just explaining, like you don't want to be writing all your case studies while you're designing a site, right? So I'm like, even if you plan to migrate from one of these other ones, like I'd pick the one with the most limitations to keep me focused on the writing, and then later move to something else if you wanted to.
Well, we suggested write your case study in a Google Doc or something.
Yep.
So again, you're not distracted by design, and people can comment on it more easily. Yep. And then bring it in. Good. I don't have to apologize for that either.
No, that's
anyway.
Fine.
Cam, thanks so much. This was tremendous,
yeah, no
and thank you also for letting us record this, because that's another sneaky way we can get this word out to everybody. I have absolutely no idea when the next one of these little free events is happening, but I do want to alert you, we're working right now on putting together a portfolio speed dating. And we'll have probably a couple of different date options, and you'll